Hello and welcome to the 5th Family Investment Center Ask Us Anything webinar. I am Tamara Stelting, your host today. Founded in 1998, Family Investment Center is a team of professional advisors that provide clients with commission-free fiduciary services in investment management and financial planning. We have 3 offices: St. Joe, Missouri, Lenexa, Kansas, and Gilbert, Arizona. We currently serve clients all over the United States. Our panelists for today are founder and chairman of the board, Dan Danford, Chief Executive Officer, Richard Salmon, President, Taryn McMurray, and Chief Operating Officer, Nate Goodman. These panelists will be fielding questions from the question and answer section in our Zoom link. If you would like to submit a question, you can find the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, right down there at the bottom of your screen. You're going to click on the button to type in your question. I will give the questions to our panelists. You can stay anonymous to the viewers when you ask the question, or you can just ask the question anonymously as well, but nobody will know who you are. We will try to get to everyone's question if we have time. So here's the legal disclaimer that we have to read. Family Investment Center is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by the panelists on this show are their own. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented is for educational purposes only and is not intended to make any offer or solicitation for sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and unless otherwise stated are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as a recommendation appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from qualified tax, legal, or investment advisors to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. So now we're going to have Richard join us. We will now be focusing our conversation on Alan Spector and Keith Lawrence's book, Your Retirement Quest: 10 Secrets for Creating and Living a Fulfilling Retirement. Take it away, Richard.
All right, thanks, Tamara. Well, you got to love those disclaimers, don't you? So this is a conversation about your serious freedom. We're going to spend about 30 minutes, maybe up to 40 minutes, talking about the book, the concepts in the book, that sort of thing, and then we'll take your questions at the end. As Tamara said, this is a book by Alan Spector and Keith Lawrence. I actually read this as part of my advisor study group earlier in 2023 and felt like it was so good that it was something we wanted to share with clients and other folks that were interested. And it's called Your Retirement Quest: 10 Secrets for Creating, Living a Fulfilling Retirement. And you know, one of the things I like to tell people is you start your retirement journey the day you start your first job. Okay, it's never too early to learn and implement the concepts and ideas in this book because they're pretty applicable all the way across life. And the value of appreciating the journey versus getting to the destination cannot be overstated. I've been doing this a long time, more than 30 years, and I've yet to have a client who was truly unhappy during their working years suddenly learn how to be happy in retirement. And so you've got to figure out how to enjoy the journey as you go through it, or the end result of the retirement won't be as good as it could have been. So the book talks about 10 secrets, and we're going to talk about each of them briefly, and then we're going to talk about the process that the book lays out for creating and living a fulfilling retirement. So that first secret is freedom. Retirement can truly set you free for the first time in your life. You know, I look back on my grandparents, and most of us our age, our grandparents, this would have been a concept they couldn't even thought about, right? Nobody believed that you could live for 10, 20, 30 years without working or more and be able to succeed in life and not starve to death, right? This idea of a long, fulfilling retirement is a very new phenomenon over the last 20, 30, 35 years. I mean, literally for the first time in history, people have the choice. They have the financial resources and other resources to be able to do that. And so you can take advantage of the freedom from stress, from other obligations, freedom of choice and action, et cetera, to be able to live life the way you want to live it. It's also about more than money. You obviously have to have the financial resources to make this work, or it's not going to make sense. Money is simply the tool that allows you to do that. So the purpose of this presentation isn't to focus on the money. While that's important, this is about everything else other than the money. The fact that it's a quest. There's 5 distinct stages that they lay out in the book, and we're going to talk about those in detail later, but understanding which stage you're in and how to move forward, and also the fact that you can get stuck at some of the stages. We're going to talk about that. Number 4 is planning. Retirement is exciting, but it's also very unnerving for a lot of people, and so they hesitate to engage in the planning for it. Doing a written plan for your retirement can help reduce that anxiety. Most of you listening to this presentation are already our clients, right? So you get that planning is important because you've been doing it with us for a long time. Number 5, holistic. We're going to talk about 10 critical areas of your life that make up a fulfilling retirement. Many of those are overlooked by people, and so we'll go into those in more detail later in the presentation. Number 6 is mindset. Retirement's a state of mind. Basically, if you think you're old, you are. I've joked for years that we've got clients that are young at 80, but we've got clients that are old at 50. And both of those are reality for those people. I love the story. My grandmother, on my dad's side, lived to be 97 and a half years old. And she lived in her own house up until the last 10 days before she fell and broke her leg and went downhill very quickly. But we had a 90th birthday party for her and a big dance. I mean, she was the mother to 12 children, and all 12 children were still alive. And so I was dancing with my grandmother at her 90th birthday party. And I remember saying to her, you know what? This is so much fun. Let's do it again in 5 years. And we did. And the fact that she just embraced life like that, she never did get old, I guess, is kind of the point. Number 7, team effort. This is going to come up a number of times during this presentation. Your retirement affects those around you, especially your spouse or significant other that you're closest to, and their input and support is going to be absolutely critical in this. You've got to identify, recruit, and involve your closest team and those that are going to be helping you with your retirement. There's a joke in the financial planning world about the financial planner sitting across from the desk from a couple, and traditional couple, the wife had stayed at home raising kids, and he had worked and earned the money, right? And he'd been retired for a couple of years. And so the financial planner asks the wife, so what do you think about his retirement so far? And she says, well, I've got half the money and twice the husband, and I'm not sure I'm happy about either one. And that's not what you want to see happen. And this is why you have to work together as a team to get there.
It's not Papa.
The number 8 is action. Retirement planning begins now. You never know what tomorrow is going to bring. So as I was saying, retirement planning begins now. You never know what your tomorrows are going to look like. So if you don't remember anything else from this presentation, the only thing that's preventing you from living the life you want to live is you. Not your job, not your family situation, not anything else. We still have freedom of choice. And our job as financial advisors is to help our clients use their financial resources, their career asset, et cetera, to be able to have a better life. But if you think you have to wait till retirement to enjoy life, it's just probably not going to happen. And we don't want to see that. Resiliency. Retirement life is always evolving, frankly, as work life is always evolving. Sometimes that's going to be good. Sometimes that's not going to be so good. But you have to be open to new opportunities, be receptive to change. And sometimes reality is going to give us some setbacks. Couple of examples I can think of. We had a client couple where one of the spouses developed MS, and they came in to talk to us about, hey, you know, we were going to do this Alaska cruise a number of years from now, but we're thinking about doing it now. We're trying to figure out if we can afford it. And basically our answer was, you can't afford not to do it now, because 5 years from now, your mobility may not permit it. And that's exactly what would have happened. And so they went on the cruise. Yes, it changed things just a little bit, but it was one of those experiences that would have been foregone if they hadn't done it then. You know, we also have had clients who've retired early. I can think of one client that retired in their early 60s and immediately started having serious health problems. And retirement in no way was what they thought it was going to be. But then on the flip side of the equation, I've had several clients who said, well, I don't need to hang on to this money because I'm not going to live that long, except they did. And so that's the other side of the equation. So just realize that the only constant is change. And number 10 is time. Your time and energy are the most precious resources you have. And in order to maximize your well-being, you need to use them to their highest and best use. This is another thing that we're going to talk about a number of times through this. The clients who have something to retire to tend to be much more happy, much more satisfied than those who don't. You know, when somebody tells me they want to retire, that's the first thing I ask is, what are you retiring to? And this is where career downsizing, or the concept of an encore career, can really come into play. Because if you've got a situation where maybe the money's not quite there yet, but you're really burned out and you just don't want to do this anymore, most people will simply not give themselves the permission to say, I can go from 100% to 50% or 70% in my work life, and that will make the money work. And suddenly I'm a lot happier with my whole situation. So why is change so hard? There's the concept of skill, will, and support. Skill, do you have the knowledge to act differently than you currently do? Number 2, do you have the will? Are you really committed to doing something different with your life? And number 3, do you have the support? Skill and will are about you, while the support is focused on your environment. There's classic examples of story after story of, like, say somebody's going to start a workout routine, and they haven't been somebody that's gone to the gym or trained or that kind of thing. You know, if they engage a partner in that journey and somebody who's going to work out with them that they're accountable to, the odds of maintaining that beyond the initial first weeks, when most people tend to drop out, goes way up. And second, does your environment support your new way of living? Is your partner, spouse, family, et cetera, supportive of what you're getting ready to do? It makes all the difference in the world, because change is hard. We human beings are creatures of habit. Retirement. Being busy is good, but it's a different kind of busy. In work busy, it's mostly non-discretionary. Retirement busy is a lot about choices most of the time. Your work busy, many times those are external stress inducers. Retirement busy tends to be internal stress inducers, things that you're putting on yourself. With your work busy, you structure your time to survive. Ideally, in retirement, you're structuring it to enjoy. And in work, you're mostly responding to business, where in retirement, ideally, you're mostly responding to your passions. And I've had clients tell me this last one many times. After they retire, I don't know how I ever had time to work. That's part of the definition of a good retirement. It means that they transition successfully and they're having fun. There are 3 retirement freedoms. I think Tamara said, and I'll reemphasize it again at the end, we're recording this, and this is going to be available on our website probably in the next couple of weeks, however long it takes us to get it edited and posted. But these 3 retirement freedoms are a really good way to frame up this concept. Freedom from the previous ties, and it allows you to regain control of your life. You're not accountable to a clock or to an employer, that type of thing. Freedom of, you have freedom of discretionary choice and action that you may not have felt like you had before, and the freedom to discover more about who you are and guide your life. So it's a great way of thinking about it. What's my freedom from, freedom of, and freedom to? There are 5 stages of retirement that they talk about in this book. The first one being anticipation, up to the 5 years before. Then there's the honeymoon phase, disenchantment, rejuvenation, and fulfillment. One of my favorite client stories about disenchantment with retirement is I had a client that was just the most avid golfer you're probably ever going to find, right? Every time he could find time to play, he would play. He'd been retired for a little over a year now, and we were sitting there having the goals meeting, the annual goals meeting. And I asked, so how's it going? And he said, you know, Richard, golf was a lot more fun when it wasn't my job. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you know, when I could only play 2, maybe 3 times a week and I had to fit it into my schedule, I appreciated it so much more than when I can play twice a day, 7 days a week. Suddenly now it feels like work. And that client ended up going back and redeveloping a consulting career in the field that he was in, but in a way that he controlled the time. It was less about making the money. It was more about being involved in something he was passionate about and still being able to golf. But when the golf was everything, it wasn't as much fun. And I've been through this a couple of times myself. As many of you know, I've had more than one career, and my air traffic control career, I was an air traffic controller for 25 years till I retired 10 years ago. And I remember telling everybody a year ahead of my retirement, this is when I'm leaving in March of 2013. And I spent that entire last year enjoying the fact that this is probably the last time I'm going to get to do this, whatever this was, you know, different types of scenarios that come up, et cetera. And I really enjoyed that sort of victory lap for that last year. And another transition was when my Army officer career ended. I was in the Army Reserve for 14 years and went up through the rank of captain and made the decision to get out in the early 2000s because my business was simply taking up too much of my time and I couldn't see myself staying if I got activated. And it's no coincidence that my leadership journey within the financial planning profession started at that time. First locally here with the Kansas City FPA chapter, then nationally, and then with CFP board, because it allowed for a transition that wouldn't have been there otherwise. So it's been consistently demonstrated that having a plan is among the most important habits of successful retirees. If they have a game plan for both fiscal and non-money aspects, and they revisit it, they update it, they tend to be more satisfied with their financial lives and with their retirement lives. Many people spend more time planning a 2-week vacation than they do planning their retirement. And the thing I want you to think about from this, you know, you may be in your 30s or you may be in your 70s. I don't know. But no matter what stage of your life you're in, if you're still working, these concepts apply to your working life just as much as they apply to your retired life. It's basically a good process to follow in order to get what you want out of the life you have to live. This is another slide that would be a good one to go back and revisit after the video is up if you want to dig into this deeper. There's basically, they called it 3, and then they added a 4th question. The first one is, do you have enough? Both a practical and an emotional decision. Number 2, do you have a holistic plan and do you know how to implement it? One of the challenges retirees tend to face is replacing that intellectual stimulation they took for granted from work. There may have been a lot of stress there, but there was also a lot of good stimulation that they end up missing. Number 3, have you had enough? Are you feeling burned out? This is something that happens to a lot of our clients, but this is where, again, that encore career, that career downsizing concept comes in. If you're feeling burned out, but yet the money isn't quite there, and we're telling you as our client, the money's not quite there, you know, if you can downsize your career, either, you know, taking a part-time role or a lesser role in the same thing you were doing that you still enjoy, or moving to something completely different, either one can work, but asking yourself these questions can get you there. And then the last one, which we referred to earlier, is your spouse, partner excited about your new and different future together? Because that's an important question to answer too. So the way the book lays this out is a 4-step process. And we're going to talk about each one of these individually: assessing where you're at, developing a plan, implementing the plan, and then reassessing and renewing it. Not much different than the financial planning process we follow. It's called a 7-step financial planning process, but realistically, it's accomplishing the same things. So one of the things that you want to think about as you start that whole 4-step process is your purposes and values. And we've seen this over and over with clients. The most fulfilling retirement will occur when your plans are consistent with your life purpose and your core values. They need to guide every choice you make as you plan your retirement, just as you live your life now. And as you implement and renew your plan, maintaining that alignment is going to be a key part of the success. So I referenced earlier 10 critical areas of plan development. We could do an hour-long presentation just on this, but I'm not gonna put that much time into it. We're basically just touching on these. The first one is having that life plan that we talked about, a practical, holistic, up-to-date, and written plan for retirement. The purposes and values that we just talked about. Being clear about your reason for being and what's important to you is going to make a huge difference in the success of the rest of your life, whether you're still working or you're in retirement. Attitude, having a positive mindset. One of the jokes I make all the time is that I basically hire for two things. Number one is attitude, and number two is intelligence, because I can't change a bad attitude. And if you don't have the native intelligence to learn what we need you to learn, then we're just not going to be able to make it work. But with those two things, you can just about do anything in life. And then the next one is well-being. And this is one that, one of my biggest surprises as a financial planner, and I've told many of you clients this, I've learned more about medicine as a financial planner than I ever would have dreamed when I started in the profession over 30 years ago, because we live vicariously through all of our clients, heart attacks and bypass surgeries and cancers and joint replacements and, kids coming into the world, people dying. And I've had the conversation with clients many times. I don't care how much money you got. If you don't take care of your health, it's just not going to matter, right? You have to focus on that. And then financial security, having sufficient resources. And again, this is another conversation I've had with many clients who say, I just want to retire. And I ask them, is it worth sitting at home all day doing nothing, living on beans and rice to not work? Because that doesn't sound very satisfying to me. Is there a way we can downsize the career, apply your skills and talents to something else in a way that's going to allow you to keep working, even if it's less, so that you can live a good retirement as opposed to just a let's barely get by type of retirement. Connectedness. Your relationships. This is an area I kind of referenced a little bit earlier as far as the intellectual stimulation, but also the connectedness and the relationships in your life. If you don't have a good core group of family, friends, etc., and acquaintances that give you that, a lot of people get that mostly from their work. And one of the things that disillusions them greatly when they go into retirement is all of a sudden those people aren't there anymore because they're still working. And the reason you were connected was because of the work, and there wasn't a friendship outside of that. So you really need to think about and nurture your relationships as you go through this process. Giving back, making a meaningful difference. What are your passions? Enthusiastically pursuing, let me say that fast 3 times, many activities that give you the energy and provide you with the achievement, etc. How do you keep growing? If you're not growing, you're dying, is basically what it comes down to. And what are those activities? And then are you having fun? The number of people who do not enjoy their work life and don't find it to be fun is very sad. It's one of the things that we really appreciate about what we do and the role that our clients allow us to take in their lives is we get to have fun while we're doing it, with them, for them, amongst our team. And all of that's really important. And as you think about the concept of an encore career downsizing, etc., just remember, work doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's very hard for people to kind of give themselves permission to say, I don't have to keep doing what I've been doing. So as you assess, ask yourself, where am I at in life today and where do I want to be? And you look at those 10 elements. Again, you can go back and reference this later and answer those 10 elements and ask yourself where you're at on it, because that's going to give you the ability to develop the plan that you need to develop in order to be successful through the rest of your working life as well as retirement. As you develop your plan, I really had a great opportunity when I was the national president of the Financial Planning Association to work with a very seasoned executive by the name of Marv Tuttle. He was the CEO, the chief executive officer of the Financial Planning Association when I was their national president. And one of the gifts he gave me was the concept of a stop doing list. Most of us are constantly thinking about what do we need to start doing? What do we have to keep doing? But very few people give themselves permission to say, okay, before I add something else to my plate, what can I or what should I take off my plate? And that was back in 2009 that I was president of FPA, but learning that and asking myself, what is the highest and best use of my time versus the things I take off my plate, delegate to someone else? You know what? 9 times out of 10, at least, they end up doing it better than I was because I really didn't want to be doing it. And so if you can live at the intersection of where your passions and your skills are at, as you develop your plan, you're going to be much, much happier. And think about these 3 freedoms as you're doing this: the freedom from, the freedom of, and the freedom to. These are great frameworks for having the conversation with your partner, with your spouse, as you think about the next stage of your life. As you go to implementing, we talked about skill, will, and support. Do you have the skill to do what you want to do? Do you have the will and the motivation, the support, and the environment around you? One of the things that we like to call you, this isn't really a presentation about money, but I'm going to talk about money for a little bit. We've had some clients that they want to retire from their career, whether it's as an executive or whatever they were doing, and then they want to go out and buy a business at 55 or 60 or 65. And one of the things that we emphasize greatly as you're planning your retirement, focus on your intellectual capital, not on your physical capital. And what I mean by that is if you have to spend most of the money you've accumulated to go out and buy that, whether it's a McDonald's franchise or whatever it is that you're going to do, and if that doesn't work, it's kind of like putting it all on red at Vegas. You're starting all over at a stage of your life that you really don't want to be starting all over. And so if you can focus on your intellectual capital and your time, because you can spend those, and yes, there's an expense there. Once you spend a day, you don't ever get it back, right? But if you're focusing on an ability that you already have or an intellectual ability that you develop and that somebody's willing to pay you for, that's much less risky than taking all the money out of your 401k or your IRA or taking a mortgage against your house to fund this business. And so be very selective and specific about what you're intending to do. And, for our clients, we caution them, don't put your future at risk at this stage of your life to start a venture that you don't have experience with. And then renewing your plan. As we've talked about before, life circumstances are going to change. Recognize when enough change has taken place that you want to, it warrants renewal. I mean, we literally do the same goals meeting with retirement clients every year in the fall that we do with our working clients. And it's because they have a lot of the same issues. You still need to think about what's going on, what's new, what's different, what do I need to deal with? Are there any new health challenges, things going on with my family, et cetera? You need to seek and be open to those opportunities that are going to enable you to enhance the plan. I've had clients many times in retirements make multiple shifts that's worked very well for them. And realize you can get disenchanted, just like my golfing client. He thought he was entering the greatest stage of his life when he could play golf every day. But as we sat and talked about it, he said, you know what? Not working for me. I still want to play more golf than I did when I was working full time, but I don't want to golf every day. And so by doing that, he was able to get his retirement back on track and make it more fulfilling than it would have been otherwise. And that's why even without a major change, we check in with clients every single year. This is what the goals meeting is about in the fall, to make sure it's still right, that it's still working. All right, Tamara, so I will stop sharing my screen. And I will ask Nate and Taryn and Dan to come back up and join us.
Yep. Thank you, Richard. As the other 3 join us, here's a reminder of how to ask the questions. At the bottom of the screen, down here, down at the bottom, you can't see, but there's a question and answers at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can click on that and ask questions. I have a couple of questions that have already been asked that we're going to start with. So as they're answering questions, feel free to ask away, and we'll get started.
By the way, just to reintroduce everybody here, Dan Danford was the founder of Family Investment Center, and he's currently the chairman of the board. And Taryn recently became our president, and Nate is our chief operating officer. So you've you've got way too many years of experience here. I don't even want to talk about how many it is. So the first question is, how can retirees navigate changes in family dynamics, especially if they're spending more time with family members?
I'll take a stab at this one, not because I'm retired or am even close to retirement, but rather from the other end of my parents have recently retired. And so we're taking the first couple of years steps into figuring out what does that family dynamic look like and how do we navigate it? Exactly this question. And it'll depend on, as any of these questions, it'll depend on the individual situation. Our specific situation is that my parents live half a country away in Arizona while I'm here based in the Kansas City area, whereas I've got friends that their parents live just down the road or in the same town or maybe within a short drive. And so seeing what it's looked like for them as their parents enter retirement and what it looks like for us with parents being several hours away looks different. But for the several hours away, you know, they come and they stay for the summer or for a month at a time, and we have a space in our home where they stay in our home. And so the dynamics for us have been us as children taking the time to figure out, what do our parents want in retirement? Do they want to spend a ton of time with us or with their grandkids? Do they want to be taxiing or participating in these kinds of things? Or do they want to take some time to really just be alone and travel? And they've done a little bit of both, but asking the question from the children's standpoint of what do you want, so that we can honor that and participate in a level that allows you to enjoy retirement in the way that you wish to retire. And same for my parents, you know, they've asked questions of us of, you know, we've got this free time, how much engagement do you want us to have in your lives? And recognizing that we're not the kids that grew up in their home and that they got to dictate what our time looked like. They're now having to ask of us, you're adults, what does your time look like? And how can I engage in that in the way that makes sense for you and your family, while offering what makes sense for what they want in retirement? So just having a dialogue about it has been something very helpful for our family to make sure that everybody gets what they need and want.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it comes back to the theme of communication, right? You have to communicate what your needs and wants are and understand what everybody else's wants and needs are. And then it works. So I'm going to give this next one to Dan, since he wrote an entire book about it. Is it necessary to reduce or eliminate all debt before retiring? I know Dan definitely has a perspective on this.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. And it's one that many people tell you, right off the bat, you got to pay off your house before you retire, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And there are actually three levels that I look at in this. The first is, like we've talked about much of this today, is a comfort level. The truth is there are some people who just can't stand debt, and they are not going to be happy carrying debt no matter what. Even if it's good debt, and even if it's a nice arbitrage or leverage to actually enhance their finances, they aren't going to be able to sleep at night as long as there's debt. So for those people, take care of it, get it paid off, okay? Absolutely. The next is that it's a cash flow issue. So if you have adequate income coming in to pay that house payment each month and still take care of all your other obligations, then yes, you might consider carrying that mortgage forward. And I know that sounds alien to a lot of people around here, but I also got to point out that, across the country, there are literally millions of people who pay rent every month. They don't own a house. They never owned a house. If you were in New York City, I can just tell you, a fair number of the people who live there are renters and will rent for their whole life. It's just part of what they've built in as their ongoing expenses in retirement. So it's not as alien as it might sound. It just, geographically, we have more people who own their homes. And then the third is, it could be a good investment if you're paying low rates on the rent and investing the money to earn at higher rates, okay? And a good example of that, and I've seen it with my retirees in the past, who had enough money in the bank to buy a new car, but when they went to buy a new car, there were incentives offered that would loan them the money for 0 or 1% for the next 3 years. And they'll say, well, why wouldn't I take the money if I can get it for 0%? Exactly. Okay. It's not costing you any interest at all, but that money doesn't come out of the bank or wherever you've got it invested where it's earning interest. That's a choice. It's a luxury. If you can afford to do it, sometimes that makes sense. The same with mortgages is exactly the same. And what I try to tell people is, they want freedom from their mortgage or freedom from their payments. Well, having the money in investments to pay that off at any time, if you want, is just as much freedom as paying it off in the first place, right? So again, there are financial reasons why you might not want to pay off your debt. That's great. If you're one of those people that can't sleep nights because you have debt, then pay off all your debt and never worry about it again. It's a luxury to be able to use debt to your advantage. And if you're comfortable doing that, there are a lot of ways to do it. So it really is a personal choice is my answer to the question.
And I like what you said, Dan, about knowing that you have assets for those that do have assets to be able to pay it off when they want. Because it's not like when you approach retirement, I've seen too many clients think that they have to make a choice as they retire, and that's what it is going forward, rather than coming up with that mindset of, I have it, I'm going to choose to go with what you've recommended, which is to hold the debt for, all the reasons you just spoke of, knowing that if there comes a time where something in my situation has changed, or maybe just my feelings have changed and now I want to pay it off, you can do that at any time. So it's not like you have to make a choice today and stick with that choice. It can fluctuate with time.
Absolutely. Great.
Well, I read a really good book about the Great Depression not too long ago. And one of the reasons why at least a lot of middle-class people have this aversion to having any kind of mortgage debt was in the 1930s, when a lot of people got their homes and their farms foreclosed on. The banking rules were different. Even if you were current on your mortgage, if you were making all your payments, if the bank was going under, the bank could call your loan. And they did, because a lot of those banks were failing. So an awful lot of people, the lesson that our grandparents and our great-grandparents learned was, don't have debt. Because even if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, they can still take your stuff away, right?
I trust the bank. Right.
I tell people it's really funny because they say, well, I don't want to leave the debt to my kids, kind of thing. Let me tell you, if there's still a mortgage on your house, there will be a sign in your front yard before you're in the ground. Your kids don't want your house. Okay, they're going to sell the house, pay off the mortgage, and keep the difference. That's just how it works today.
Yep, I agree. All right, here's one for Nate. How can one prepare mentally for the shift from a work-focused life into retirement?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Richard. I mean, this is one of those things where I'm a huge fan of slow and incremental change, right? And so how do you effectively make that transition? Well, you've got to start early, right? You cannot wait until a year prior to making that transition into retirement to start thinking about these things. I mean, you've got to take a proactive approach, and we spend a lot of time, and frankly, there's probably folks on this call that have experienced some of the coaching that we've provided over the years, what we call career downsizing, right? You're not going 100 miles an hour up until retirement to zero and then doing nothing for the rest of your life, right? Yeah. It's finding something that you're passionate about on a regular basis to find that glide path through that transitionary period, finding something that you're passionate about. And I work with a lot of folks that, are younger and still it's kind of the same mindset of, allow yourself the opportunity to see opportunities. You ask yourself the question, could I see myself doing that, while I'm still working? And then all of a sudden, while I'm not, I give up my career asset. I've been doing these things for years. It's not a sudden transition, right? Some of our happiest clients have done that effectively, and we've helped coach them through that process. And it looks different for everybody. There's no right or wrong answer there. Certain folks will leverage their career asset, into some sort of consulting type work, some sort of part-time work where it's less about the amount of money that you're bringing home, because you've kind of reached that threshold of being financially independent, which again falls on us to help you understand when you're there, right? And then also keep you there, but help you coach you through that process and allowing yourself to see the opportunities. Because most folks put their head down and grind out their career, then all of a sudden, okay, now I'm retiring. Oh crap, what do I do? Right? And it's so much more important at that point to focus on what you're retiring to and not what you're retiring from. And I think we do a good job of helping people navigate that transition period.
Yeah, and as you're planning for how do you mentally prepare, I think you touched on this, Nate. I think one of the keys is not to wait to prepare for retirement as it pertains to what activities you're going to do, what's the income stream going to look like, where do I pull from, all of those things. Not to wait for, here's retirement date, and now I'm going to start thinking about this.
Right.
But rather to take some time to plan for it before the celebration, which is retirement. I think of it in terms of even your wedding day. You plan for your wedding day, you anticipate it, and that's wonderful. But the most successful marriages seem to be the ones where you were already anticipating what happens on day 2, and beyond. And how do I prepare for making this a successful relationship? I think you can take that same analogy and apply it to retirement, and not just planning for that day, the celebration, but planning for what are the logistics, what do I want out of this, and how can I, talking about the family again, how can I plant myself in what is the new family circle, what is the new day-to-day life, and planning for that. I would even say, a couple of years in advance.
Yeah, it's a tough change in mindset, right? I mean, you spend so much time and energy focusing on your career. Again, you've got to give yourself permission to see, opportunities as they come up and engage in things that you're passionate about and you're energized about.
Well, one thing I would add to this is we have a lot of clients that say to us, well, I'm really looking forward to spending my time volunteering, some kind of non-paid,
Yep.
non-compensated work, right? And some of the time that is very successful. But many times clients end up somewhat disillusioned. I can think of a couple of examples where somebody who had really had the skills because of their career in law enforcement to be a high-level volunteer with an organization like the Red Cross, once they went and worked a couple of disasters for the Red Cross, they came back to me and said, there's more bureaucracy in that organization than I'm willing to deal with, right? Because one of the problems with volunteers is you can't fire them, right? They take all the help they can get, right? The organization does, but people end up many times in those organizations building their own little kingdoms or fiefdoms, and it can be very, very challenging and less satisfying, I guess is maybe a better way to put it, than what people thought. But like I said, we've had other clients where the volunteer work they do is tremendously meaningful, both from a contribution financially as well as what they're able to do working with and for the organization. Once again, it's that disillusionment thing. If it's not working, you adjust.
Yep.
Okay, I'll take the first shot at this one. It says, and this is an Ask Us Anything webinar, right? And so somebody asked, are we very close to taming inflation with a soft landing? And do you have a general market outlook for 2024? Well, that's about another hour of conversation
or more.
But Nate and I just did an annual review with one of our charitable organizations that we manage money for, and literally just had this conversation. And the bottom line is, I think a big part of the market resiliency we saw late in the year when the stock market went up very rapidly, which is why we don't jump in and out of the market, because you just can't time those things, right? Nobody expected the market to just go whoo for the last 6 weeks of the year, but it did. And so a big part of that, though, is I think that both the Fed as well as the general public is starting to have the attitude that, inflation is not as bad as it was, and it doesn't look like it's going to turn into the late 1970s again. It was less transitory than the Fed originally said, but yet in many ways it was still at least somewhat transitory. And so this concept of the mythical soft landing seems to be becoming reality. But as we look to the general market outlook for 2024, there's a couple of things internally in the U.S. that I think are major issues, and then there's a couple of things externally outside of the U.S. that we need to look at. And the biggest one internally is simply the election. You know, we've got a presidential election cycle, which is always a period of potentially major change, right? And this one has the potential to be a doozy.
It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm here for it.
We're not political prognosticators, right? But we need to care because we help our clients manage their money, and that is affected by what happens politically, that kind of thing. And so we're going to be watching it very closely. But the bottom line is, I think we're going to see some turmoil from it. Is really what it comes down to. And so we're just going to have to deal with that. And then the other thing is we've got it's going to be another couple of years, but less than 2 years from now, we got a major tax law change coming, where the current tax code that came into existence in 2018 expires at the end of 25. And it's already being talked about a little bit in Congress, but frankly, I don't think there's any political will to do anything until after this next election's over. And so once we've got whoever's going to be president, you know, beginning of next year, as well as the new Congress, once they're seated, that's probably going to be one of the first major issues that they deal with, is an expiring tax code. And what happens if it expires is essentially we go back to the pre-2018 rules, which means that the alternative minimum tax, AMT, comes back the way it was. The brackets all jump up 2 or 3%. This is one of the more favorable tax codes that consumers have had in a while, that taxpayers have had in a while. And so there's probably going to be some change associated with that we're going to be dealing with. On the international side of things, there's really 3 big rocks. The first one has been going on for a couple of years, which is the Russia-Ukraine war, which has been affecting things, you know, energy prices for a while and food prices, with, you know, that kind of thing. And then the Israeli-Hamas Hezbollah situation in the Mideast, which has the potential to blow up and become a wider, you know, conflict, that type of thing. You know, most recently, shipping rates have been going up and shipping times have been going up because the Red Sea is a huge choke point in the Mideast as far as getting things from, you know, Asia over to Europe. That really shortens it, because when you got to go around the Cape of Good Hope, and I've stood on the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, that's a long detour. There's no other way to describe it. It adds a lot of time to the process, but there's too much risk right now for ships to go through the choke point in the Red Sea. And then the third one is China. And maybe to a lesser extent North Korea, but the big one is China, because China's economic recovery has really not been working for them, right? And in some ways, I think some of the warming up of the relations that we've seen over the last 2 to 3 months is a direct result of China wanting to get some of those economic partnerships back. And it's just hard to tell exactly what's real and what's not with this kind of stuff. And we don't pretend to have a crystal ball in understanding all this, but we do pay attention to it because it's an important part of our job. So that's kind of a high level type of overview of it. I don't know if any one of the other 3 of you want to add anything to that, but that's basically what I just told a client this morning.
I was just going to say, as it comes back to the whole United States piece with the election, because that's where a lot of my energy and interest lies. And something that's interesting about this particular election is if the 2 current front runners for the 2 major political parties are in fact the people that we're voting on here in November, both of these candidates only have 1 more term that they can serve. So yeah, regardless of who gets voted in, if in fact those are the 2 candidates, whoever gets voted in only has 1 more term, and we tend to see more interesting things take place even as it pertains to the market in a second presidential term. So that's what we're likely to face with this presidential election. But we're here for it. We're ready to manage whatever the, you know, to weather the storms, if that's what it is, or to ride up the piece. So whatever's here, we're ready to handle it right alongside you.
Good point. Okay, next question. I think I beat on that one hard enough. So this is a tax question.
Ooh, I'll take that one.
part of the Ask Us Anything. So that one of the changes that came out of the Secure Act 2.0 was the ability to roll 529 funds potentially into a Roth IRA, and some of the rules around that, as well as are there some states with different rules?
Yeah, so it's important to remember that there are still the existing options that were there before for what to do. And the thing we have to keep in mind first is we're talking about what to do with leftover funds, because the primary reason for the 529 is still to pay for the, post high school expenses that the beneficiary might come up with. So we're talking about what's left at the end of this journey and what to do with it. So the existing options are still there. You can still, use it for varying levels of education past the first 4 years. You can still roll it to a different beneficiary. But the new thing that now exists as of, this is the 11th day, because it wasn't effective until 2024, is that you can roll it into a Roth IRA. Some of the things to keep in mind is that the account has to have been open for 15 years. So we're talking about an account that's been around for a while. And if you choose this option of rolling it to a Roth IRA, it has to be for the person that's marked as the beneficiary. The third thing that I would point out about this is that you can't just dump whatever is left from the 529 into a Roth IRA and stamp it as yay as a gift and march along. There are some things that you have to keep in mind as far as the amount. So there's a lifetime amount of $35,000. So if you've got $50,000 left in this beneficiary's account at the end of their education road, we're only talking about this option pertaining to $35,000 of it. And then you can't just roll over the whole $35,000 into the Roth IRA all in 1 year. It's also limited by what the annual contribution limits are into a Roth IRA. And assuming that we're speaking of a beneficiary that's under the age of 50, for 2024, the contribution limits are $7,000 a year. So $35,000 is the maximum that you can do for this particular option. $7,000, now we know it tends to increase the amount of contributions year after year. So for purposes of easy math for this explanation, let's assume that the contribution limit stays $7,000 per year. Well, that would mean that you would be able to roll over the full $35,000 over the course of 5 years to the tune of $7,000 each year until you've reached that maximum. But if next year the contribution limit is $7,500, then you can do $7,500, which means that you'll be able to roll over potentially, I would say probably not in 4 years, but potentially earlier than 5 years.
A few things to add there, Taryn. I mean, as most things with the IRS, there's an asterisk next to it, subject to change, right? I mean, one of the things that they haven't rolled out would be, like you're talking about, the cost of living increases on the contributions increases to the $35,000 lifetime max. One other thing would be, and one of the things I'm coaching a lot of our younger folks is, maybe you're not maxing out the benefit to the 529 now. Go ahead and open them. Start the timeline. That 15-year timeline is a huge threshold to get over. So go ahead and get them open, start funding them to your ability, that kind of thing. But start the clock. It's critical. You can, most states, you can do a minimum amount, 25, 50 bucks, whatever the state minimum is, you can do. And then also the only other nuance there, the beneficiary of the 529 has to be the same person as the Roth account owner, and they also have to have earned income for the year of the rollover. So there's a lot of different, rules and stipulations that you've got to have, but this is a great new tool that just rolled out, like Taryn said, in 2024, that we didn't have before, for folks that aren't using all of the 529 money.
Yeah, and real quick, specifically the question asked about, are there some states that have different rules? So I want to point out that the state rules pertain to when you're making contributions to the 529. So whether you get to deduct those on your state tax return or not, that's when there's state-specific rules about the 529. But as it pertains to rolling over monies from a 529 to a Roth IRA, there's nothing state-specific about that.
Okay. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left before the top of the hour when we promised we'd be done. So I'm going to throw one more question to Dan and let him finish us up, which is, Dan, should we continue to help our children or grandchildren financially after retiring? I think you're muted, Dan.
Sorry, there we go. Really timely question for me. I have a column in the Kansas City Star in the next week that talks about this very issue. And I guess what my thing is it all came about because one of my friends was talking about what he was going to leave to his son after he was gone, and he said, well, I'd like to, use whatever money I need and then leave him a little seed money. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, if you live till 95, you're going to be giving your son seed money when he's 70 years old. Okay. I mean, that is the truth. Okay. Because lifespans have gone to the point they have. So what I spend the rest of the column talking about is using that money instead of being mad money for when you're 70 plus years old, use it to have positive impact on your kids and grandkids when it will have impact for them. The time to pay for a college education is when somebody's 25 years old, not when they're 75 years old. If they're at the point in their life where they're getting ready to start a business or something, let me help you start that business. Now, I also say, document it. Do it just like you do any other investment. Treat it like a loan. Do whatever you're doing, but help them out to do the meaningful things in life instead of just accumulating the money so that they can blow it in their own retirement, is what I would say. And I encourage people to do that. My mother helped with my kids' college. And the reason I had her do that was so she could see them enjoying those college years and stuff and know that she helped pay for that. It was good for them. It was good for her. And that's what my answer would be to the question. If you have the means and you like helping, do help, but try to help them do things that are going to have meaning for them later in their life.
No, that
Well,
makes
and I like
sense.
that last piece that you said, Dan, about if you have the means, because
Yeah,
some
absolutely.
people don't have enough excess to be able to do this kind of gifting because they need to make sure that they have enough to live off of. And one thing I tell my parents all the time, because they have this ingrained thing that they have to gift money to us, is that they've already done a lot of the gifting by helping educate us and helping to get us to the point now where we're self-sufficient. And so I want them first to take care of themselves, as I would tell any client. First, the money is to take care of yourself. If you have, like you said, the excess means, then I am completely in agreement that I'd much rather see them enjoy that and do it while their kids are in the younger years and could appreciate, it could do some more good. Yep.
Yeah, I always say you can finance higher education, you cannot finance retirement.
That's true. Absolutely right. And truthfully, when I've talked to kids and parents, I want to say 80% of the time, kids will say, I don't want your money. Use your money to enjoy your retirement. If there's any left over afterwards, I'm glad to get it. But I don't want you making sacrifices today so that I get a check down the road someplace.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah, that's the last line I'll finish up with is that, one of our goals as good financial planners is to make sure your last day and your last dollar don't have to line up.
Exactly.
All right. So we've got to wrap it up here, folks. Once again, the questions, the presentation will be posted to our website. We'll put it out onto our YouTube channel, that sort of thing. As soon as we've got it processed and ready. If we didn't get to any of your questions, feel free to reach out to us directly, telephone, email, text, whatever. We'll be glad to talk about it. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and stay bundled up. Somebody may be listening to this presentation sometime in the future, but today is January 11th, and it's going to be about 10 below zero in a couple of days here in Kansas City. So stay warm, everybody. Thanks.
Bye, guys.